Yes. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Samuel,
Yes, good evening.
Samuel, Samuel. Hello, jambo vipi?
Hello, niko mzima. How are you?
I am better.
Great, great, great. Nilikuwa na I think my nini was not picking up the sound. Headphone, my earphone was not picking up the sound clearly. So I was
Uh,
speaking and you couldn't hear anything.
okay.
Yes, karibu sana. How are you? How was your day?
My day has been amazing.
Yeah.
God has been good. Amenilinda
Yes.
and amenirudisha nyumbani jioni.
I'm glad to hear that.
Wewe siku yako imekuwaje?
Siku yangu imekuwa njema pia.
Okay.
Shughuli kadhaa hapa na pale na pia mimi nimewezesha kurudi nyumbani vizuri. So namshukuru Mungu
Amen. Glory to his name.
kabisa. Wow, so
Yes, Samuel.
it's really great to have you here once again. And
Thank you, my brother.
yeah, it's always a pleasure to host you and to have these wonderful discussions.
Thank you.
And so today, like I had promised and like I had said, the focus of our discussion is going to be on IP with regard to business, IP in relation to business.
Okay.
So I know you've come and you are loaded with good stuff for everyone who's going to be tuning in, either live
Okay.
or later on checking out our recorded segments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and therefore, once again, just for the sake of those who don't know who the OG is, I want you to introduce yourself and your company and what you do at your company.
Thank you very much. My name is Ogwang, Omuga, Oongo. Samuel calls me the OG. And I run an organization called Institute of Intangible Resource Awareness,
Yeah.
which is actually a subsidiary to our law firm, our private practice, which exclusively deals in intellectual property.
Yeah.
We primarily deal with our main focus of intellectual property is actually in 4 areas. We deal in something called advisory, where we develop organizational operating capacities in advisory consulting. We conduct research on IP exclusively, and we conduct equally training on intellectual property at organizational as well as individual levels. And it's actually a sincere privilege even to be here with you and to have access to your platform and to spark intellectual property conversations. And I'm extremely grateful, Samuel.
I am also greatly honored to host you because I know that what you offer is very relevant to the marketplace, very relevant to this century, very relevant to this millennium, and very relevant to anybody who is going out there, who is putting themselves out there and doing anything. Because, intellectual property for sure is a game changer, and our understanding and appreciation of the same can make a big difference with regard to how we conduct our business and how we do pretty much everything out there.
Mm.
And so, again, for the sake of somebody probably who was not here or who has not had an opportunity to look at what we discussed last week, once again,
Mhm.
take us through the definitions. What is intellectual property?
Thank you very much, Samuel. Intellectual property loosely can be defined as the creation of the human mind. But that in itself is not something that I would want people to adopt as a working definition of intellectual property. In
Yeah,
as much as if you Google online, you Google intellectual property, they'll tell you intellectual property is the creation of the human mind. The reason why I say that is not sufficient is because anything that your human mind creates does not pass for intellectual property. So intellectual property must be restricted to a particular area. And the area in which intellectual property is concerned with comes the other the second part of the definition, which means
yeah,
intellectual property is the creation of the human mind
mhm,
with an interest to commercialization.
yes,
So whatever your mind can create, if
mhm,
you don't have an interest to commercialize it directly or indirectly,
yes.
then such a thing does not qualify for intellectual property. Yes, Samuel.
I hear you, and I hear you clearly. And I believe those who are following and those who will be following will also get to understand that and appreciate it. That it's very important that the idea of the intent to commercialize, that is what
Yes.
qualifies something as intellectual property, right?
Mm.
Great.
Yes, 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 Samuel.
So, if you were to give examples of intellectual property in as far as business is concerned, what would you say if somebody stopped you on the street and asked you, um, when I'm talking about intellectual property in relation to business, can you give me an example of intellectual property? What would come straight from you?
First and foremost, I would help that individual to accurately define business because majority of us have never actually understood what business is. And so there's a huge confusion at the marketplace. We have entrepreneurs operating as businessmen and businessmen operating as entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs at times operating as industrialists, and industrialists at times operating as investors. So there is an entire mesh of confusion at the marketplace.
I am also
This is
confused
what a
when you
business.
say. I am also confused when you say all that. So please clarify the difference.
So this is what a business is. Because the challenge that we have, especially at the marketplace, if you don't appropriate what you seek to embody,
Yeah.
chances are you might not exploit it fully. And for us to and get the reason we are all defining this thing in scope of intellectual property. And so this is what a business is.
Yes.
An individual, and I would want to paint some scenarios for your audience.
Yeah.
If I am a salonist and I go to my salon and I have 10 attendants in my salon,
Yeah.
but I'm the person with the key. I come and I open the salon and I stay there the entire day. I
Yeah.
might not even be serving people directly. I might just be there checking, but I'm the person who receives the money and actually sometimes even give the balance to what we call change.
Yes.
At the end of the day at 6 in the evening, I'm also the same person who closes the door.
Yeah.
Am I a businessman or a business lady? No, I am not. I am in self-employment. The person who anapeleka pikipiki, na
Yes.
the entire day wende unapeleka pikipiki na unarudi jioni, you are not in business, you are in self-employment. Self-employment is any revenue generating venture that needs the presence of the owner for it to run.
Yes.
So any venture that you do, in as much as you could be generating profit, as much as it requires your personal presence for it to run, that does not qualify for business.
Yeah.
That qualifies for self-employment. Now, a business is any economic generating venture that does not require the presence of the owner for it
Yeah.
to run.
I hear you.
So Chris Kirubi is a businessman. People think that Chris is an entrepreneur. Chris is a businessman because Chris could be somewhere playing golf, but Hako Tiger brand is running,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
All his portfolios are running. So a business is any economic generating venture that does not require the presence of the owner or the founder
Yeah.
for it to run. So an entrepreneur, and the beautiful thing with the intellectual property as far as sparking that conversation around business is concerned,
Yeah.
intellectual property is concerned with creating options for an individual that you can employ your
Yeah.
forms of intellectual property and have them work on your behalf.
Yes.
To the extent that your forms of intellectual property can actually work on your behalf, you qualify to be a businessman. Why? Because your intellectual property works on your behalf.
Yeah.
Like we had said the other day, and just to remind your people,
Yeah.
intellectual property gives an individual with two options. That if you can identify your forms of intellectual property, then intellectual property gives you two options. Do you wish to go about this venture directly yourself, assuming the stress and the strains of running a venture? Or do you wish to employ some of these resources that you have in ways that they can work on your behalf? And a typical example that we had given last week was, if you look at the business model of Java House,
Yes.
Java is operating in Nairobi, but Java is operating in Nairobi exclusively out of licensing the Java franchise. So part of the Java franchise has created a business model for Java House in the US. When you're looking at KFC, KFC has actually licensed their KFC franchise. So the KFC franchise has created a business model, a business outlet out there for KFC in Atlanta, Georgia. So that is one of the ways that intellectual property seeks to harness an individual. Let me give you another example. Let's say one of your audience is a tailor.
Yeah.
And as a tailor, you either have two options, either to go about it, ufungue a place whereby when utakuwa unashona, at the end of the day, unarudi jioni, ama pengine uko hata na watu, people who wana tailor with you. But intellectual property seeks to ask the tailor is, what is unique about your tailoring? Are you a tailor who can design? Yes. If you're a tailor who can design, then intellectual property seeks to inform you that, do you know, you don't necessarily need to go about it directly. Do you know today you can license your designs to EPZ, and EPZ will manufacture for you in bulk? So that is how intellectual property seeks to build capacities in an individual so that you can exploit your forms of intellectual property and they can work on your behalf. To the extent whereby they are working on your behalf, you qualify to be an intellectual property enabled businessman. But if you so wish to go about it directly, then guess what? You also qualify to be an intellectual property enabled self-employed individual.
I think that is in black and white, so nobody should be confused about that. My next question for you is, why should I care to understand intellectual property as a practicing or aspiring entrepreneur?
One, because entrepreneurship itself does not exist without intellectual property. And the challenge with entrepreneurship, the most important challenge with entrepreneurship, especially in Kenya today, is entrepreneurs who are going about their entrepreneurial endeavors are not even aware at what point their different forms of intellectual property begins. The reason why I'm saying that is that there are huge chances in entrepreneurship we are not unlocking value in the process of entrepreneurial endeavor. And what is value? Value, loosely defined in intellectual property, is a consideration to which people attach at a point of consumption. So if I'm consuming your service, chances are I could be consuming an aspect of value that if you can reinforce on intellectual property, then that value is complete.
Yeah.
A typical example would be when you go to a Java outlet, right? There
Yeah.
is no Java outlet in Kenya or anywhere on earth that you'll ever find painted color blue. There is no Java outlet. There is no Java outlet that you'll ever find anywhere on the globe that actually has plastic seats. Nowhere. So let me ask you, what is the economic value of that shade of red that all Java houses have? If you go back to their balance sheet, that actually the paint itself, that shade of red, that shade in itself,
Yes.
equally in their balance sheet has actually financial equivalent
Yeah.
in that.
Yeah.
Majority of entrepreneurs, we have not even highlighted, we have not even harnessed the value of the name of your business.
Yeah.
Most of us, we have not even harnessed the value of your product, the value of your service delivery, your product development processes. So when you realize that as an entrepreneur, if you have not yet appreciated intellectual property, regardless of how that intellectual property presents itself in you, then chances are you are not fully exploiting the economic value components of your idea, the economic value components of your innovation, the economic value components of your product or your service.
Yeah.
Intellectual property is where value rises and value falls.
Wow, 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 wow. So people need to pay attention to a lot of things and at the right time. That's what I'm getting from.
Yes, yes, yes.
Uh-huh. So again, I will repeat this now from a business perspective. I know we talked about this with talent last week, but hey, what are some of the losses I am likely to suffer as a business person if I fail to understand intellectual property? If I am ignorant around intellectual property?
A typical example would be
Yeah.
if you don't appreciate intellectual property as a business person, and actually you have now tried to distinguish that by a business person is an individual who has put in place infrastructure and systems,
Yes.
that some of these systems actually run
Themselves.
without you needing you.
Yes.
So to that extent, if an individual can qualify as that, then
Yeah.
such an individual actually merits to be called a businessman. The reason why, as a businessman, you really want to appreciate intellectual property is because intellectual property operates to give you options.
Yes.
Intellectual property operates to give you avenues that you can define value. Intellectual property seeks to harness within you capacities in your product,
Yeah.
capacities in your service that can actually grow up for you new market avenues. Like we have said, intellectual property is exclusively interested in one thing. Can you create another market out of what you're doing? So let's say maybe you are you run a cyber cafe,
Yeah.
and you've been running this cyber cafe for a while. Then intellectual property will be asking, what do you think you're really selling? Chances are you're not even selling the cyber service.
Yes.
So intellectual property seeks to ask you, in your cyber business, what other aspects of resources haven't you exploited? And with that awareness, then you begin to ask yourself, wait a minute, what market can come out of the name of my cyber? What market can come out of the color of the cyber? Because in intellectual property, we are saying every single moving piece of a business venture is actually a resource. Every single moving piece of actually in your service and in your product is actually an asset. And to that extent, intellectual property seeks to ask you, with this form of assets, what new markets can you open? With these new forms of market assets, what new product can you diversify from your already existing product portfolio? So that is what every entrepreneur, actually every businessman ought to understand, that chances are whatever you're selling as a businessman is not an end in itself. Every product should open up another product, should open up another service, should open up another client, should open up another avenues of consumption. Yes, Sam.
Wow, wow, wow. That's a lot of substance to consume. So, supposing I'm just a person who's getting started out,
Okay.
how do I create a business out of my intellectual property?
That's a beautiful question.
Yes,
That's a very beautiful question.
yes,
And in answering that beautiful question, I want to use an analogy that people can identify with.
yeah,
Majority of us today, if you wish to go into town and you don't want to strain yourself driving, what option do you have? You can either, one, utumie matatu, or two, what will you use? If you want, pardon?
Uber.
Exactly. Now, the problem is sometimes you can cab hail, that cab hailing, right? You can cab hail and you can use an entirely another service provider.
Yes.
But why do we call it Uber? You know, like Uber came.
Because Uber were first out of the door.
Yes, Uber came,
Yeah.
and Uber used their name to create an industry, right?
Yes.
So that industry, it's called cab hailing. It's different from taxi.
Yes.
It's different from taxi. It's
Yes.
called cab hailing. So the cab hailing industry today is synonymous with Uber.
Yes.
But let me ask, what is the name of the company that owns Uber? That company is called Uber. Right?
Yeah.
What is the product that that company sells? That company sells a product called Uber. Right? What is the value proposition that Uber sells? The value proposition is actually called Uber.
Yeah.
Intellectual property, as someone who is beginning out, if you want to really begin by creating value in the supply chain of your product or creating value in the supply chain of your service, then you should first of a necessity begin by first registering that thing that you're doing into its own entity. And that is why I always tell people, do you want to set up a business? Stop going generic. Stop going using some useless names that you will never commercialize.
Yeah.
Because if you can manage, if
Yeah.
you can manage to call your service and you can manage to call your product, and you call your company after your product, chances are you're harnessing value, you're stretching, and you're stretching value propositions locked in your product base.
Yeah.
Every entrepreneur needs to appreciate what are they selling. And if you can identify and define that product or that value proposition that you're bringing to the marketplace, then you start. Today, if you go to the S&P 500 in New York, right?
Yeah.
They're called Uber shares. If you want to buy Facebook shares, they are called Facebook shares.
Yes.
Because Facebook is the product and the entity and the organization.
Yeah.
So in that way, you are harnessing value proposition alongside the supply chain of your share and allotment and ownership of share.
Yeah.
So that understanding begins with an individual. If your business is to cook ngumu, right? The first person to have come up with it called it ngumu.
Yeah.
If that individual just knew that ngumu would actually be a name, that ngumu today would actually be its own company. The company would be called Ngumu Kenya Limited,
Mm.
right?
Yes.
Because the Ngumu Kenya Limited came up with a product that didn't exist. Hisi mandazi, hisi nini, it's called ngumu. Let me give you a typical example.
What are you saying to KDF? You know, you are saying something to.
About ngumu.
Yes, you're saying something to KDF. Maybe ngumu iliruka watu, but somebody can do something about KDF.
No, they cannot do anything about KDF because KDF is
Yes.
synonymous with the military wing. You know, the military wing is called KDF.
Yes.
Yeah, so you cannot do anything on KDF. The opportunity was on Ngumu, not KDF.
So we still have ngumu.
Yeah, Ngumu is actually an entrepreneur today can actually own the industry around Ngumu.
Yes.
And that individual can come up with a recipe and license that recipe, and an individual will make a ridiculous amount of money. Let me give you an example. The first watermelon was not oval. The first watermelon was actually circular,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So in science, they say that if your farm and the next farm, the distance between the two farms, if it's not 400 meters, then guess what? They will be cross-pollinating. So in science, they say in order for you to break cross-pollination between farms, you
Yeah.
need to have that gap between farms as 400 meters. So there is this gentleman somewhere next to Limuru, even not be just next to Limuru,
Yeah.
this way.
Yeah.
This gentleman observed that his watermelon had cross-pollinated with his inaitwa nini malenge,
Pumpkin. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, his watermelon had cross-pollinated with pumpkin.
Yeah.
And he identified that the next watermelon that started coming up was actually oval. Do you know what that gentleman did? That gentleman simply called it sugar baby. Today, if you go to the some of these seed companies,
Yes.
and they are selling that brand of watermelon,
Yeah.
do you know for every sachet you buy, a portion of that money goes to this gentleman because he's the first person who called it a name. And that name created an entire industry. So that industry is actually out of that individual's intellectual property.
Wow.
That is what intellectual property does. That as an individual, regardless of whatever you've come up with, you are supposed to coin a name, and that name is the name that defines your industry, defines your product, defines the value proposition. And if you can do that,
Yeah.
then that is your intellectual property. And you don't even need to incur transactional cost of running a business.
Yeah.
You can actually license that.
Mm-hmm. So when we ask the question, what's in a name? The truth of the matter is that everything is in a name.
Everything is in a name. And that's why let me give you another example.
Yeah.
Do you know God himself is intellectual property? Because God says that you shall never use the name of the Lord your God in vain. That is called a trademark. For you to use God's name, God must license you the right to use his name.
Yeah.
And that's why he says, I will put my name where I will choose to put my name. That is licensing. And that is how we have built models around intellectual property. Why? Because God himself is intellectual property. God has never performed a miracle twice. That is patent. Anyway, we are getting ahead of ourselves.
Wow. And I think now that you've pushed the discussion in that direction, what would you say? What's the procedure if I want to patent my idea or my innovation or something like that?
It's very simple. I always ask people, and guys are like, when I
And
interact with.
probably you can also share the costs associated with it, because sometimes people fear to go in this direction because they are thinking, I need to have a lot of money for me to be able to do this. So as you talk about it, please also reflect on the cost component. Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. When I interact with majority of newbie entrepreneurs or newbie businessmen, they're always like, I want to save I want to register this trademark. And my question is always one:
Yeah.
why? Why? Because intellectual property can be appreciated from two ways. You
Yeah.
can either register it, and there are actually very many implications with the registration.
Yeah.
Do you know today the most expensive patent equivalent formula is the Coca-Cola formula?
Yeah.
But Coca-Cola did not register it as a patent, because under the law, when you have registered a patent,
Yeah.
that patent is made exposed to the world.
Yeah.
So people can actually reverse engineer that patent.
Patent. Yeah.
And that is why up to now, no one knows the Coca-Cola formula, because Coca-Cola chose to go the alternative route. The alternative route in intellectual property is called a trade secret, right? So up to date, no one knows what the Coca-Cola formula is, and no one will ever know what Coca-Cola formula is. Intellectual property has alternatives.
Yes.
Intellectual property has options. While people can go and incur necessary costings in registration, as an entrepreneur and someone who is emerging in entrepreneurship, I always tell entrepreneurs, registration is not in your best interest. What is in your best interest is for an individual to develop intellectual property awareness. The awareness to know that today I can set up a business just by the color of the logo that I have. I can set up another value proposition or another market entirely out of the mantra of my name. Let me give you a good example.
Yeah.
The most expensive trademark on earth today is actually a three words trademark. Taste the feeling.
Yeah, you shared
That
this
trademark, yes, that trademark in itself is not even registered.
Yeah.
But Coca-Cola has built business models around that trademark alone. That is called intellectual property awareness. The ability in an individual to know and to decide. But if someone wishes to go ahead and register, you can actually visit KIPI offices, and you will incur necessary costings.
Okay. Okay. I,
Yes, yes.
I hear you. I hear you. So, probably the last question before maybe we allow one question from Kachenge, who's here with us,
Yes.
is give me examples of businesses or entrepreneurs who've done very well for themselves as far as IP is concerned. Possibly, if you can find local examples, great. And also give me one who missed the mark. Just to one
In
who did
20,
well, one who missed the mark.
oh, and you can write this, eh?
Yes.
This is an individual who missed the mark. Write Rentokill, Kenyan case. Rentokill, Kenyan case. This gentleman, in the 70s, had designed something. He had drawn something, and as he had drawn this thing, this gentleman went and registered it with Kirdi. Back then, it was called Kirdi.
Yeah.
And a few years later, the gentleman used to fly a lot. He's a very rich gentleman, so he used to fly a lot.
Yeah.
And one day when he goes to the washroom it was called Lufthansa airline
The
in
airlines, yes.
80s.
Yes.
He comes across his exact drawing, the machine he had designed.
Yeah.
And the only difference is that machine had another name on it. It's called Rentokill.
Yeah.
That Rentokill was an invention of a Kenyan that was careless about his intellectual property. And
Very
that's why I always tell people there is a very there is a danger with registration, because the moment you've registered,
yeah.
that registration is exposed to the globe. It's actually published in a magazine.
Yeah.
And people from wherever in the world can actually reverse engineer it. The gentleman has been in court
Yeah.
since 80s, since 80s,
Yes.
1980s.
Yes.
It's only the other day that the High Court at Nairobi gave him 50 million shillings. So ask yourself, Rentokil is a multinational, right?
Yeah.
What is 50 million to Rentokil?
Nothing. So
Nothing.
it's nothing completely.
So that is the risk that every individual, I always tell people, you see some of these things that they always tell you oh, this bank is putting together a competition for ideas. This bank is putting together a competition for ideas, or
Yes.
submit your business proposal. I always tell people, do not do that. The reason why I'm warning you not to do that is
Yeah.
because some of these organizations, they have reached the end of their ideation processes. Now they are looking for avenues to harvest
Other people's ideas.
ideas from the brains of people.
Yes.
And that is the risk that Kenyans go through. Do you know how many young people go through Science Congress? And how many people, how many businessmen attend Science Congress just to harvest people's ideas?
Many.
That is the risk. If you have an idea,
Yeah.
build capacity around that idea. You'd rather get the services of an intellectual property lawyer and then understand that idea. And that intellectual property practitioner will actually give you ways of how you can exploit that idea effortlessly and in very friendly ways. Intellectual property, there are people that have actually messed up big time.
Yeah.
A typical example of people who have done extremely well with intellectual property, I would actually give you a multinational, Uber.
Yes.
Uber is actually everywhere on earth today, and they don't even own one fleet. That in itself is
Mind-boggling.
mind-boggling.
Yes.
Yes. And then another example that everyone will identify with is the young man that sold his idea M-Pesa to Safaricom.
Yes.
And today Safaricom, M-Pesa is a registered product of Vodafone in Britain.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
Yeah, so that is classical. If that gentleman could even bargain for 1%, the gentleman today would be a billionaire.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah.
Very true, and very right. So probably now I would open this up for a few minutes.
Yes.
Kachenge, if you have a question to our expert here, please go ahead and ask it. Let's give him some few minutes to answer, and then we'll wrap this up.
Good evening.
Hey, Kache.
Today I'm really learning and learning the things I cannot even digest. You're going too deep, but
that's why I always say what happens on Unleash Hour is the beginning of conversations. If you want to go deeper, definitely you want to engage. So yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Hey, I like really how you are doing, and everything here is just an eye opener. It's an expansion of how I used to see things.
Okay.
and I'm getting things, and I'm getting enlightened. Actually, I'm getting some light illuminating through whatever I knew, how to secure the rights, the patents, the
Yes.
intellectual property.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I think each and every day I'm getting closer to going
Yes.
also to forums like the ones I know you must be in some forums where people now engage in this kind of what can I say?
Passions.
Uh, yeah, sessions where big minds meet. Your
Yeah.
talent, you guys are just on another level. Today I don't have any question. I'm just let me use the I don't know whether it's English or I'm just wowed.
Great, great,
Thank
great,
you very much.
great.
Karibu sana Kachege.
I'm glad to hear that. Asante sana,
Hey,
Kachege, for always joining
yeah,
us. It's always
thank you
a
for your service.
pleasure and a blessing to have you around.
Thank you, thank you. We'll continue going and going further. So let me ask,
Okay.
okay, just
Okay.
where do you get all this knowledge? Books, school?
Mine is God given. Mine is God given, and the reason
Amen.
I always say mine is God given is because not even people that we studied law with uh, have this dimension of awareness, and sometimes God gives you thoughts and He gives you ideas and He helps you connect things. And so sometimes you see things differently from your peers.
Yeah,
And it's God at the end of it all. It's God who makes one wise and He denies another. And so sometimes you see things differently from your peers.
very true,
And
very
so
true, very
sometimes
true,
you
very
see
true.
things differently from your peers.
Hello.
But if you lack a corresponding level of substance, then you are incapacitated as an individual.
Mhm. Very true.
Yes.
Some of the things that we share here truly